in a right way or in a polished enough way in React Native. They could do many things, but there were some things that were not possible to do, providing a feeling of a native application. Another way of saying this is this one. Whenever you see a sentence like this, it's because it has been said by a member of the React team or Meta or close to it. So they wanted to rewrite the internals of React Native to make it synchronous so that we can use concurrent features. This is really precise, but the problem is that it's not so easy to understand what they mean by this. In order to understand it, we need to know a bit more about how React Native used to work. Oh, yeah, that's a question I had the first time I read the sentence. The first thing I thought is, okay, why do they want to make it synchronous? I mean, asynchronous is not something good. Synchronous is non-blocking. Asynchronous is usually a good thing. What happens in here? Where when we understand what was going on, we will understand this better. So as you know, in React Native, we have like two different worlds, the JavaScript side and the native side, the platform, iOS, Android, or whatever is in there. So these two sides need to communicate with each other. And in the old architecture, they used to do this by using the so-called bridge. You can think of the bridge as a queue of messages that are waiting to be serialized and deserialized in JSON. This process is not especially fast, so this communication needed to be asynchronous, meaning that, for example, the JavaScript side would ask something to the other side and simply expect that at some point something would come back, but not knowing exactly when, okay? So another problem of this is that if you are passing a lot of messages, this is a potential bottleneck, bottleneck. So this was the main problem they had. When they say that the old architecture was asynchronous, it basically means that it was common that both sides had to wait asynchronously for each other. And when we say that the new one is synchronous, it means that making synchronous calls is an actual possibility, that we can really do that now, that the communication now is direct, okay? So when may we want to make asynchronous calls? For example, when it's initializing native modules, when you are asking for a constant that you want to use immediately, or when you want to call a native method synchronously. Okay? So we can say that the main goal was to solve the bottleneck in the bridge, but that wouldn't be complete enough. Because another thing that the new architecture has done is to bring React Native into the React 19 era, okay? And what does it mean? If we think of what has been happening in the React world, we know that with React 18, we got a set of new features called, and then under the umbrella name Concurrent React, that open up a new set of possibilities for us. Basically, now we were able to say that something is doesn't have a high priority, letting React know that this thing can wait and it can do something else, and that they come back. And all these features that the React developers are already used to. And this was possible because in React 16, Fiverr was introduced. Fiverr was a new concurrent renderer that actually enabled incremental rendering. Okay, this was a game changer that happened in React. And what is React Native doing now is actually keeping up with this. With the old architecture, it wasn't possible to use all these things that happened in React 18. And now with the new architecture, it is actually possible. So the new architecture, now we understand this, brings React Native into the React 19 era. And now we can understand the other sentence well too. It's a rewrite of the internals of React Native to make it synchronous so that we can use concurrent features. Then we can say that they wanted to solve the bottleneck, but also, and more precisely, they wanted to create a new solid foundation that unlocked new capabilities. That was the real goal. Okay, and how have they done this? Well, they have made possible a direct type-safe communication between both realms. If we had this before, they actually needed to get rid of the bridge, right? And what did they put instead of it? What is called a JavaScript interface. The JavaScript interface actually allows both sides to be aware of each other, to communicate directly. Okay, so the proper way of picturing this is actually this one, because it's not anymore something that is in the middle. It's simply something that is exposing the native methods to the JavaScript side. And how? Well, basically via C++ host objects. Now, the JavaScript side can call these host objects, and then it will be directly talking or communicating with the native side. And does it mean that we need to learn C++ now? No, because these bindings, these connections between both sides are going to be built to us by a new tool also introduced in the new architecture called Codegen. Codegen is going to help us creating these bindings, okay? It's going to help us as well with more things. Because now we have another two pieces of the new architecture. Turbo modules, which are like the new iteration of the old native modules, okay? And fabric components, which are the new iteration of the legacy native components that now are rendered with the new fabric render, okay? Fabric components are more related to things that are visual, and turbo modules more related to things that are with logic and functionality. So with Codegen, we would define a TypeScript specification. Why TypeScript or Flow? Because Codegen is going to generate for us code in languages that are strongly typed. So we need to write this specification in TypeScript. And from it, Codegen would generate the code in C++ and also Java and Objective-C. And after that, we would add, if we needed, the specific logic in the native code that we need, okay? So Codegen is actually improving the developer experience by generating native boilerplate and ensuring type safety, okay? And what do we get with that? Well, now we have efficient communication between native and JavaScript, strongly typed interfaces that are consistent across platforms, and we have also a part of our code that can be an important part of our code written in C++. This is if we want to, for example, to develop a library that is going to need something from the native side, okay? And why is this very important? Because remember that React Native, the host platform, it doesn't need to be only iOS or Android. It can also be desktop, consoles, or smart TVs. So now, if, for example, we need to do something very complex, in maths, we can write that part in C++, and that we will have to write that only once for all the platforms. Okay. So, and that's not all. Before, the native modules needed to be loaded on the startup. Okay. And now, with this new architecture, they can be called when you need it. They can be lazy loaded. And this actually improves startup time. This is possible because the JavaScript now holds references to the modules so that it can load them whenever it needs it. And it's also possible because Codegen is assuring that we are using the proper types. Okay? Regarding the fabric render, which is now being changed for the old UI manager, before we had the communication over the bridge that was asynchronous, now, as we have said, we have UI native methods exposed to JavaScript, synchronous communication is possible, task prioritization is possible, and what does it mean? That we can prioritize which UI elements we want to render, using asynchronous for low priority, synchronous for high priority, for example, for animations. Technically, what is happening is that each fiber of the React element tree is holding a reference to the corresponding React shadow node. Okay, so it's the new architecture who is enabling these possibilities. So it would be more precise to say that it looks something like this. These ones, we are helped by Codegen to generate them. We have direct communication with the native part, and there is also another advantage, is that we can use now any JS engine. So this is engine agnostic, okay? And this has opened up the possibility of using Hermes, which is what being used by default in React Native. It is a JS engine optimized for React Native. Okay. Okay, and with all that, what can we do now? What happens now? Now, what has happened is that there's a new set of possibilities has opened up for us. What exactly? So, we have overcome all limitations that were the things that we have already mentioned. It used to operate asynchronously, serialization in JSON was needed, it lacked type safety, all modules were preloaded. Now instead, we can operate synchronously, we have direct communication, strongly typed interfaces, lazy loading of the modules, we have the possibility of shared code in C++, it is engine agnostic, and we can use the concurrency capabilities. And in practice, what can we do? For example, now we can synchronously access to layout information. Imagine that, well, the typical example of you want to render a tooltip, and then you need the information of the where the user is clicking and the size of the screen to render it in a way that it doesn't go out of the screen. So before, with the old architecture, we would use on layout, and there was nothing ensuring that the measurement and the state update happened in the same comment. Now, with the new architecture, we can use layout effect. And now we are sure that the measurement and the state update happen in the same comment. Visually, well, instead of doing it with tooltips, which is a bit boring, we have this guy, is a young Athenian, Alcibiades, and we have Socrates, who wants to talk to him, keeps following him to talk to him about something or teach him something. And in the old architecture, it would look like this. So they cannot have a proper conversation, it's impossible, because the Socrates tooltip is not following properly. And in the new one, it would look like this. Okay, now they can chat. So, and you may wonder, how is it possible that it looks so bad in the old architecture? How are people doing things like that way? Well, what happens is that normally you do whatever the technology you are using allows you to do. So you would find a workaround, do something a little bit different. And what is happening now is that a new range of possibilities opens up to React developers. Now you can think of new ways of doing things, of new user experiences that you were not able to use before. Apart from this, of course, we can also use all the concurrent features that we know from React, suspense, and really important, we can handle heavy communication between the two sides. For example, we can think of processing video in real time, which was something that we couldn't think of before. And even more important than all this is that React Native now is ready for whatever comes next in React. So this is one of the most important things. That is not only that we can do new stuff now, is that now we are keeping up with whatever happens in one side, React can follow up. Okay? One more question. What about performance? Does this mean that everything in the new architecture is more performant? Well, not necessarily. Remember that what they wanted to do is to allow to develop new things. But of course, they were worried that the things that were already done were at least as performant as before. So they have been already using this in production for a long time, and they have checked that in Facebook, and they have checked that the performance is at least neutral. Okay, so it may be that your application doesn't get any immediate benefit from the new architecture. Bottleneck in your application, maybe you see improvement. Or if you were not transferring lots of data from one side to another, or if you were downloading lots of native modules. So in these cases, maybe you don't see a direct improvement. But if you are in one of these cases, you should see some improvement. And also, there is something that has generally improved thanks to fairness. We have provided better start time, better memory usage, and better app size. Okay? Okay, well, can we use all this already, and should we use it? Well, think that this hasn't been something that has happened in a day. They have been doing a lot of work for many years already. So in version 78, they already introduced the first pieces, fabric and turbo modules. In 72, they introduced this interop layer that allowed the applications to use modules that were already still legacy. Okay, and they have been doing a lot of work to help the library developers to move towards the new architecture. In version 73, they got completely rid of the bridge because with Fabric they have moved component rendering to the off the bridge. With turbo modules, they have moved native calls off the bridge. And after that, they moved everything else. So now, with the new architecture, the bridge is not being used at all. In version 74, they improved the interop layer, making it automatic, and now they are officially in beta. And they say that they expect to have a stable version by the end of this year. So when they were asked in the React Conf a few weeks ago, I think it was Ricardo Cipoleski who answered this. He said, "We think it is stable enough to try it in your app, but expect some rough edges." Okay, then should we try it already or not? What they say is, if you have an application in production, you should wait a bit more until they get the stable version. If you are maintaining a React library, in that case, yes, start looking at it and try to upgrade your library to the new things. And what about if we are building a new thing? What should we do? Well, in that case, they haven't said anything, but my personal opinion is that you should jump in, start with the new way of doing things, because it's something that is here already to stay. Okay. Another recommendation I would say is, if you're interested in this, it's very good to have a look at the working group that they have, because everything is being developed like in a transparent way. You can read about everything they are doing, everything they are discussing, and it's very interesting. Their community is also great. They are doing a great job with this, and it's also very insightful to have a look at the conversations that are taking place between important React Native libraries, that, like for example, React Camera Vision and the React Native core team, because they are asking all the questions that that allow you to see what is exactly happening. So this is pretty interesting. Okay, if you have to remember a few things about this talk, I would say that you remember that this change hasn't been something small or something that has happened in a day. It's a long-term plan. It's a complete rewrite of the React to solve some limitations that the previous approach had. Okay? It's opening up a new range of possibilities for us, like a new superpowers that we have. And this is especially interesting now that we have the complete integration with Expo that Kadi was explaining this morning. So now it's going to be easier than ever and more powerful than ever. I hope that I have been able to show you a glimpse of it and that you have an idea of what has been going on in this environment, why, and how the future looks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Okay, so folks, I'm going to give you a quick explanation before we do a Q&A of what is happening. So we are behind, but what we are doing is we are going to still give you a break, and then this track is going to be exactly what is called behind. That makes sense on the schedule. So when you look on the schedule and you see this track, just imagine it is one talk behind what it was. We will not be having the last talk of the day for you, Noah. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it due to a family thing, so our best wishes to him. But we're going to still have a break, and then we will get going in about half an hour at 4:45 with our next amazing speaker. But I do want to invite Victoria back up, just in case there are any questions. Does anyone have a question about Victoria's talk for her? Anyone? Any hands? Oh, I see a hand over there. Yes. Let me run up the stairs. It's fine.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. So last time I've used React Native, it was like 3 years ago. So the differentiation between iOS and Android was the best. I'm not sure now with the newer version